Thank you. Oh my gosh, so much better. All right, what's up guys? 5:40:15. If this is the first time joining us, looks like we got 5 folks on, and I think we know everybody right now, but that's cool. 5:40:15 is a spot where we take a few minutes to talk about some things that are going on in tech, either within the federal government or otherwise. We also like to talk about certain opportunities within the federal government, and we'll talk about one today. Just as a brief overview of some of the things that we're going to try to cover in this session, and I think we sent some tweets out. I want to spend a little time, granted this is only 15 minutes, so we'll do what we can, on talking about test-driven development. We'll actually talk about it in the context of JavaScript today, using a tool called Jasmine. Test-driven development is test-driven development, so most of it's not specific to the tool, but we will talk a little bit about some of the capabilities that are within the tool. And then Altman, what are you going to talk about? Something OAuth?
Oh yeah, opportunity from MyUSA.gov. They're using OAuth for some stuff, so we'll talk about that a little bit later on.
Excellent. That's the intro. Also, we are 540Co. You're obviously following us on Twitter if you're getting to Meerkat or Periscope, and then you can also find us on Facebook, find us on YouTube, which we'll post this video to later, and we'll also provide all the links to whatever we're talking about at some point. So test-driven development, or you'll hear it referred to as TDD, right? It's a little bit more of a technical topic, but I think it's something worth addressing, and we keep encountering best practices for test-driven development in a lot of the projects that we're running into. What is it at its core? Well, you can almost simplify test-driven development and just call it unit testing. Though test-driven development is more of a practice that utilizes unit testing. Unit tests are the actual tests that you write that are automated on your source code that create some automated tests of smaller units or functions within your code. That's a very weak definition of unit testing, and you could obviously go into a lot of details about some of the differences between different types of unit testing, even including things like integration testing or
even functional testing.
Functional testing, yeah, that's a good point. But when I say unit testing in this context, I'm going to be saying it meaning let's focus on a specific function in your code. So you have to have some decent level of code design. We'll talk about that maybe. And then you need to write a series of tests that test all the boundary cases for that function, that ensure that the function is doing what is expected to do, that the function is performing the function that you wrote it for. A lot of times we overload functions with way more functionality than a single function deserves. And so as you're writing unit tests, it does create this compelling event to make your functions more specific. And that's a good thing, because that's what they were intended to do. Now, as we think about test-driven development, that actually implies that we're going to start writing the tests before we write the code. That's interesting, right? That means that you really need to think and understand how your different modules within your code are going to interact with each other. It means you need to start thinking about the different functions that would be in an object if you're doing an object-oriented design. It takes some planning, obviously. And then you can take the next step, and what Jasmine in JavaScript would call itself is actually more of a behavioral-driven behavioral-driven development, which that's slightly different. It's when you can actually write your tests in such a way that they're human readable. This means, I could define maybe a suite or an object that I want to test, and then some properties about that object, very, very readable. I have a calculator. I expect, when I add 2 numbers together, it gives me the sum of those numbers, or and then list out those different test cases. Well, when you do that, what you're doing is you're creating a human readable suite that then you can hand off to your development team. The development team can then take those tests and write the unit tests to automate the code tests for that. And at the same time, you can hand those tests off to a test team, and they could write test procedures, like manual functional test procedures, and at the end of the day you come together and wow, everything seemed to have run and passed, and you have software that has no bugs, which will never happen. But we can pretend, right? But you can get as close as possible by using some of these test-driven development, behavioral-driven development techniques. I'm really shorting myself on time to talk specifically about Jasmine, and there are a lot of these tools out there, right? I mean, the first behavioral-driven development framework I probably experienced was Cucumber, right. Which we used over in some Ruby on Rails development. And then obviously even in Rails there's RSpec, which maybe that one's just more just unit test framework.
RSpec, mini test, there's quite a few.
Yeah, JUnit, PHP unit. They all see PyUnit.
Yeah, pretty much every language is going to have their own, unit testing. So
in unit for .NET, right?
There you go.
Very popular. And then when you start thinking about it from the JavaScript perspective, you have tools like Jasmine, you have tools like Karma, you have tools like Protractor, and then there's also some tools that kind of span across, maybe like a Selenium. You can do some UI testing, automated UI testing, and things like that.
Selenium, Capybara. There's quite a few of those as well.
There's a lot of testing frameworks out there. We should be using them, right? So Jasmine, what does Jasmine do? So as I described for a behavioral-driven approach, Jasmine gives you the ability to create test suites. Typically what you would do is you would create a test suite on a specific object. So in that calculator example, maybe I have a calculator object, I have a calculator test suite, and that's going to actually test all of the different values within that, functions within that particular suite. Those different functions are in Jasmine speak are called specs. And then any spec, so when I say, this calculator should be able to add two numbers and give me a sum, you can put in many assertions into that spec to validate that spec is, that function is working as you would expect. In a lot of testing frameworks, you would call that an assertion. The way that Jasmine refers to it as an expectation, and so the name of that function is actually expect, and then you provide it some sort of a value, and then you can do some evaluation on that, right? You can say this should be true, or this should be false, or this should be a function, or this should be close to a number, and or match this and give it a regular expression. It has a lot of power there. Jasmine also provides you the ability to create stubbed functions, like any solid unit test framework should. So you can create some stubs. You can create listeners. Lots of things. I don't think we're gonna have time to cover them here necessarily on this Meerkat or this 54015. So what I plan to do is I've created a slide deck. I know, PowerPoint. Couldn't help myself. And then I'm going to maybe do a longer session on test-driven development. It's probably going to be more like a 1 hour type of a video. Maybe we can break up into segments. We'll figure that out. And I'll do a screencast, and maybe in a couple weeks we'll post that on our social media as well. But it will focus specifically on using Jasmine as a tool to test your JavaScript. So Google Jasmine. I think that's all you have to Google. It's going to be the first thing that comes up. If you want to be sure, do Jasmine JavaScript. I think the URL, it's a GitHub one, jasmine.github.io. So if you go there, learn more about Jasmine. That's about all I can do talking about unit testing without actually writing a unit test. So I'll pitch it over to Altman, and we'll talk a little bit about.
Yeah. Well, real quick before we jump over.
Banter.
Yes, just one of the things on TDD. Writing those tests up front, it's not necessarily just so that you're getting test coverage in your code, or just so you get good quality code. Like you said before, sometimes we put a lot more stuff inside a function than we really need to. One of the goals of TDD is you write the test first, and then you write the minimum amount of code needed to make that test pass. And then you can obviously come back later and refactor and make it even smaller. But that's just one of the benefits, is not only are we trying to get good quality code, but we're also trying to write less code as well.
Yep, absolutely. And the code, you mentioned code coverage. What's an ideal code coverage? People debate the number. Typically it's around 80%.
Right.
I think at some point, everyone will mention that as you get to that last 80% and try to write unit tests for that last 20%, the amount of effort it takes to write those tests actually outweighs the benefit of them. And this could be a whole topic on its own, but code coverage, expect like an 80% type of a thing.
Yeah, because you got to be careful sometimes too. Like you go a little too far with tests, you might have some unit tests and some functional tests, and there could be some overlap. So you might get some redundant testing if you're trying to get to that 100%, and it may just not be quite worth the time and effort to maintain those redundant tests just to try to get a high coverage percentage.
Exactly. So what are the benefits of using OAuth?
Okay, all right. So mine's not necessarily code related. I mean, it kind of is a little bit. But we had an article come out from 18F, I think it was back on May 18th, talking about a new site that they've put out called MyUSA.gov. And what this is actually doing, or will do, is trying to simplify interactions with multiple federal government websites. So right now, if you're interacting with different government agencies and you go to their websites, you typically create an account on each site, fill out long forms, put in all your information. It's a time-consuming process, and then jumping from one site to the other, you're forgetting your username and password. You're like, oh, well, was that my login for this site? Was it for that site? So one of the things that MyUSA.gov is trying to do is trying to make a single login for all these government websites.
Right.
So you can come create a single account. Some of that information can be shared across all those different government agencies, just to make it simpler to log in and register. But one of the cool things that they're doing is they're actually using a standard that some of the big names, Google, Facebook, Twitter, have been using for years, and it's called OAuth, or Open Authentication. So what that allows is just exactly what they're trying to do: create one account and then share those credentials with all of the other sites, without necessarily giving up your username and password to all the third-party sites.
Right.
And I'm sure we're all familiar with that already. A lot of the apps that you install on your phone, if any of them post to Twitter, you've probably seen that you might punch out and authorize that app to use your Twitter account.
Or Facebook.
Right, or Facebook. That's all OAuth. In addition, you may go to some websites or something that says log in with Facebook, log in with Twitter. Again, that's all using OAuth as well. So this is actually a pretty cool thing that they're trying to do to simplify account creation and access through all the different government agencies. It seems like it's still in the early phases. Right now, their only partners seem to be Business USA, USA.gov, and Benefits.gov. And I think they're doing site upgrades constantly right now. But give it a look, MyUSA.gov, and just keep checking for updates.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, I always, from a developer perspective, and like you said, OAuth's been around for a while, right? At one point, OAuth kind of got I don't want to say a bad rep, but with OAuth 1.0a, there were a lot of times when we'd create clients that utilized an OAuth service, it sucked. It was not easy to build. And
right.
and a lot of that had to do with very specific rules on organizing and signing and creating certain signatures that go along with those payloads.
Right, yeah. So one of the things with the first version of OAuth, OAuth 1.0a, or semi-first version, was that it was meant for secure and insecure networks.
Right.
So part of trying to keep everything private was those signatures and encrypting the data as you send it across an unencrypted network.
Right.
So like you said, for developers, that was one of the complicated aspects of creating an OAuth client or any applications that used OAuth. But with OAuth 2, version 2 of it, that is only on HTTPS and encrypted networks or encrypted communication. All the signature stuff went away, so it makes it much easier to deal with.
Yeah, OAuth 2 is a lot easier. So that's awesome. And I would assume.
So I'm not really sure. I'll have to look in a little bit more to see exactly what version. I know the link in the article pointed just to the main OAuth site.
Got it.
Starts with OAuth 1. But there's also the links to OAuth 2 on that page as well. So I'm not really sure what version. I'm hoping they're going with version 2, but either way, it's a good
Yep.
good sign.
If any of you guys know the answer, go ahead and post it on YouTube. Give us a shout here on Meerkat. Otherwise, we'll look it up and we'll post it. Whether it's OAuth 2, OAuth 108, some more feedback there. So yet another successful 54015. Woo! Man, is this number 5 or 5 or 6?
I think this is 6.
6. Oh my God! And we'll have another one next Wednesday at 7 a.m. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us. I'm at Trey White.
At Killer BGT.
We're at 540Co. We'll see you next week. Peace out.
Peace.